So I've had an unexpected hit with my OA theory, and it's actually the most views I've gotten in the shortest amount of time. But this video has also been really controversial because I have as many people that like it as don't like it. And I'll admit, I did not go into this series thinking that I was going to make a theory of it. I kind of got towards the last third of the series and thought, wow, there's really something here I want to talk about. So yes, there are details that I missed and didn't write down. And yes, there are things that I did not convey myself as well as I could have. So I wanted to try this over again, going through each episode one at a time. Now, I already have my Word document set up here so that I can take things that I noticed from the episodes and put it in the column for angel, liar, or inconclusive that it doesn't prove one thing one way or the other. So I'm just going to go through my list of notes for episode 1. Okay, so right in the beginning of the series, OA is seen jumping off of a bridge, and when she wakes up in the hospital, the first thing she basically says is, "Did I flatline?" So after having watched the series through before, now I know why she asked that question. I would put that in the angel column because she didn't do that as part of a story. It was something that she legitimately asked, so I will give her the benefit of the doubt that she believed what she was saying. Now, I don't really know if this fits into any of the categories, but I also want to put in the inconclusive section that the nurse says, "Blink twice if you can hear me." OA doesn't respond. That seems like she could be in shock at that moment, but it's odd that she could hear the nurse and just didn't do anything. But then in the liar column, I'm going to kind of put in the note that the nurse said she had severe hypothermia and that she was in shock, because the trauma from jumping off the bridge could account for a lot of damage to her body and her mind. OA also has this sort of no-touching recoil that she does over and over again at least 4 times in the first episode alone. She tells the nurse not to touch her, she recoils when her mother reaches out for her hand in the hospital bed, and granted she didn't really know that that was her mother in that moment, but later in the bathtub she recoils again. And then OA tells Steve that she does not like to be touched, but then in the very next scene, she's shown holding onto his shoulders. So maybe it's that she doesn't like to be touched herself, but she's okay if she's the one doing the touching. But if that's the case, that makes me very concerned about her story, because that kind of automatic response and recoil towards human touch is often a symptom that rape victims have. I also find it really suspicious that OA feels for her scars while she's in the St. Louis hospital room. She already should know that they're there. It's not like they were going to vanish. That has never happened or been part of it. So what is she checking for? That seems off to me. When her parents come to the hospital to get her, the nurses say that she won't respond to Prairie, which again, she should remember that she used to go by that name. She remembers later that she went by Nina as a child. So to not respond to the name at all, to not give any hint that you recognize it, suggests to me a mental disorder yet again. The hospital workers even describe OA as having a fractured mental state, and that she was agitated and kept trying to get to the computers in the ICU. And that might not sound like a big issue, but I'll get around back to that in a second. When OA gets home, she arrives to this big group of people waiting to greet her, and news media and everything else, and she hides under a blanket. There's really not a whole lot of reason to do that, other than maybe she doesn't want touched, or she maybe just doesn't want the attention. But I'm going to put that in inconclusive for right now, because that could really support either way, just depending on how you want to look at that situation. OA tells herself that Prairie is not her name. And even if she does feel like she is an angel and she wants to be known as the OA and that's that, she still knows that Prairie is her name. That is her legal name on every document. She is not going to go down to the government and collect assistance as the OA. At least not without a bunch of name change forms first. So saying to herself that Prairie is not your name comes off in a way that, to me, sounds like my schizophrenic relative talking to himself, trying to convince himself of something. When OA speaks to the FBI, she says, "I didn't disappear. I was present for all of it. All 7 years, 3 months, and 11 days. So even though she's not saying anything that's really proof of what happened to her, her conviction in the belief of what she's saying is there and present. And while talking to the FBI, OA says that she walked for maybe days from nowhere. And then finally an old woman in a dusty car picked her up and dropped her off at what she thinks could have been a shelter. And then OA left the shelter to keep walking. And that's the point where OA started saying things that seemed to start subtly contradicting each other. OA has only been missing since 2009, and almost every library in the entire country has had public access computers since 2009 at least. So how is it that OA is so desperate to get on a computer that she's supposedly trying to break into the ICU to use theirs, but when she's free and walking around, it didn't occur to her to go to the library and try that? And why walk for days and go to a shelter and then leave the shelter and keep walking? Why does it take her so long to try having a near-death experience? I mean, yes, she does say that she was trying to get back to where she was being held captive, but that doesn't make any sense because she has no idea how to figure that location out. So if a near-death experience can solve her problems and tell her what she needs to know, then why does she need a computer, and vice versa? After the FBI leaves and she's going to sleep in her bed for what I believe is the first night that she's been back home, OA suddenly says to herself, Homer, like she had forgotten who he was or what she was doing, or that she was so desperate to get on the internet. I mean, sure, there was lots going on and maybe she was a little bit distracted, but if you're trying to break into the ICU so that you can use their computers to look for Homer, how are you home for hours and hours before you remember Homer and try to look him up on the internet? Now, I will go back and give credit and say I was mistaken that she does look up Homer Roberts first. It was a detail that I missed. Like I said, I watched the series and kind of towards the last bit of it, I decided to work on the theory, and she did look for Homer Roberts independently when she finally got on the internet. Now, there is an inconclusive moment, in my opinion, where OA's mom, Nancy, asks her, "Can you tell me how you can see now?" And OA says, "No, I can't." And I don't know what to do with that just yet, because I don't know if she meant she doesn't really know how to explain it, or that it's too supernatural to be believed, or if she just hasn't concocted a story to make sense of it yet. And similar to that, a few minutes later, OA is talking to her camera like she's having a direct conversation with Homer, and she says, "There are moments when I think I made you up." And yes, this is a show that largely goes off of belief and faith, but if she's going to doubt herself, then I'm going to doubt her too, because if OA isn't sure that she spent 7 years next to Homer, then how can I be sure as the person listening to her? Nancy also says that she got a paper from the hospital that says OA's phone and internet should be monitored and the doors should be open at all times. And if you don't know already, that sounds like a suicide watch list paper. So that means OA wouldn't say anything enough to where the hospital, the medical doctors who are dealing in the physical, actual issues of her personage, thinks that she's suicidal. And honestly, I cannot think of a good reason why OA won't tell anyone what has happened to her unless it's something that she's lying about, and so she has to make up the story as she goes along. And that's why she needs more time with everything, and that's why she doesn't want to talk to anybody. Now, I have had a number of people comment that since OA was able to persuade the dog not to hurt her, that means that she is some kind of magical entity with supernatural powers. I call BS on that, because if you watch that scene, what OA does is bite the dog. It's either on the back of the neck or the ear or somewhere in the head-ish region. And that is sincerely a tactic that animals use to dominate one another. So in that moment, OA didn't do a Jedi mind trick and wave her hand and the dog was magically her best friend. What she did was bite the dog, prove herself to be the dominant alpha male, and the dog backed down. If that's magical, then so is Caesar Milan. Now, while OA is in the bathtub with her mom Nancy nearby, Nancy specifically asks, "Are you hearing voices again?" So a mental disorder similar to schizophrenia has been a recurring problem for OA maybe her entire life. And let's be really, really clear to define that moment. She says, "Are you hearing voices again?" Not "Are you having dreams again?" Not "Are you having nightmares?" Not "Are you having visions?" Are you hearing voices? That's not what OA has described at all, but yet Nancy seems to have experience dealing with OA hearing voices. I mentioned this detail in the other videos, and again, it's one I mentioned wrong. I thought they had mentioned OA being a toddler, but Nancy says that when OA was learning to use her cane, she ended up hitting the wall and splitting her head open, which would be a very traumatic head injury. And still in that tub scene, OA tells Nancy that she doesn't want to tell Nancy her story because it would hurt her, and that in turn would hurt OA. And she says, "Just give me some time." And my problem with that is that the passage of time is never going to make that story less painful for the mother. So just give me some time sounds more like I need time to concoct something in my head. OA says that she thinks Steve has something to do with everything that's going on, like something part of her bigger plan almost. And she says this right before Steve comes to the window with the router. And that's supernatural-ish enough that I'll put that down in the angel side of the column, if for nothing else because she had exquisitely good timing on when Steve was coming to that window. Then while Steve's in her house, and I don't know exactly what to do with this point yet, she said she needs 5 people that are strong, flexible, and brave. Similarly, when OA starts talking about the invisible self, it's sort of a detail worth noting, but it doesn't really go on either side throughout episode 1, so I'm just going to write it down and leave it there for now. But then OA makes another really weird comment. She says, being blind was powerful. It made me listen, and it made people underestimate me. That sounds like borderline bragging that, oh, look what I can get away with because I get to play the poor me I was blind card. And that just hit me in a way that it sounded like she's up to something, or she knows how to use her blindness to be up to something. But then Steve mouthed the word boring, and OA knows that he says it, even though he doesn't make any audible sound, or at least no sound that she should be able to hear in the dressing room. When OA impersonates Steve's stepmom to do the parent-teacher conference with Miss Broderick Allen, a lot of people are crediting that as a supernatural kind of moment because she was able to sort of get into Broderick Allen's head. But to me, I put that in the liar category because OA was clearly fishing for information and doing a cold reading. Because Broderick Allen very much oozes the sense of sadness. I mean, she was the voice of sadness in Inside Out. So, I mean, it's sort of a typecast, I guess, because she just seems very depressed. And OA goes, oh, I lost someone too. And she got a little bit of a reaction out of Broderick Allen. And then OA starts trying to guess at who she lost. Oh, was it like a child or a lover or a parent or a sibling? And Broderick Allen looks up when she says sibling, and that's the cue that a cold reader needs to know that they're going in the right direction. It's the exact same tactic that like fortune tellers use, or these people who act like they can talk to the dead use to manipulate people into believing in them. Because if that was part of a legitimate power that OA had, she wouldn't have to guess at who Broderick Allen lost, would she? The next segment that I have a lot of issues with is when OA finally does get on the internet and she searches for Homer near-death experience. She finds a YouTube video from Channel 10 St. Louis Live dated November 2nd, 2007, and it says specifically in the title that Homer Roberts was a near-death experience survivor. And that bugs me on several different points. Because if this kid was a big football star and his full name is listed on this YouTube video from a news station, why don't the related videos say anything about Homer Roberts missing? It would be really stupid for Hap to go after someone who is or was a local celebrity because people are going to perk up more when he disappears. And if you listen to the video, it also says that Homer is paralyzed and that he was still paralyzed when he woke up from his coma. Since we see that Homer is able to go through all the motions and do all the movements, and we see no hint that he has any physical motion impairment, it sounds to me like a pretty safe bet that OA wasn't paying attention when she found Homer's video and she is just using a random person from the internet to fill in with her story. And maybe since he was a local celebrity and he had his 15 minutes of fame for coming out of that coma, this is a name that OA knows from before she was abducted. It's a news story that she had seen before and the name got stuck in her mind. And in Homer's YouTube video, right after he is just woken up from the coma, he talks about how next year he's going to go back and get that championship ring with the team. And that's a really weird detail because Homer does have that ring when he meets OA. But how would Homer be able to get that ring if he was paralyzed and unable to compete on the team? From the look of him in that video, he gives no indication that he can move his arms or his legs, so it seems like he would be a quadriplegic. And not only did he make a very quick and massive recovery from that, but he also went on to play on the team and win the championship ring with everybody else right before he got abducted? Or did OA hear championship ring and incorporate that detail into her story later on? Because when people are telling these very elaborate lies, it's the little details that make them believable. Now, I'm going to put the fact that OA tells everyone to leave their doors open in the inconclusive pile because I don't feel like the show ever really addressed the value of doing that, and maybe that's something we'll get in season 2. And I'm going to do the same thing where OA keeps telling Steve that I chose you. Because really, since we can't confirm 100% if she's an angel or if she's a liar, it's one of those things that's up in limbo until I can get a definitive answer. But when Steve's parents bust into OA's house, Nancy defends her, saying she's not thinking like an adult, which is another reference towards having a mental disorder. Now back in sort of the neutral column, I'm going to put in OA's video where she puts out this call for all the lost people to basically come to her, and it just could be supernatural, or it could be that she's saying the right things to convince the right kind of lost souls to come seek her out. And I also want to put the details of her childhood in the I don't know kind of column here, because I don't know if there's enough details to back up anything that she's saying there, but if there is, I want to have it written down so I can check it out later. But there is also the very weird detail that she specifically calls her neighbors oligarchs, which of course, if you've watched the entire series already, you know that's one of the books that is found under her bed. And to the same extent, she mentions St. Basil's Cathedral and Moskva River. OA does mention that as a child, her dreams, her visions had smells to them. And at least off the top of my head, I don't know any mental disorders that would cause that, so I'm going to go ahead and give her that for the angel category. Oh, but here is an interesting thing. When she's talking about her childhood and everyone is speaking in Russian, like I said, if people are telling a really big lie, they tend to get into a lot of details, more than you really need, so that they sound believable. And this could be an artistic choice for the show, but I'm not really sure, because if you're talking to people and you're saying, I was Russian, and you were telling this story while we get a visual flashback of it, everyone's speaking in Russian. So is the OA talking to the group of 5 in Russian, or is she translating everything? How is that working exactly? I know that's not really a hugely important detail, but it is a really odd detail that I don't have an answer for. And as OA explains, she gets a nosebleed when she has a premonition dream, and then her nose was bleeding right as they were falling over the cliff in the bus. OA also says that the bus crash was an attack from the Void to send a message to the oligarchs. But it really doesn't look like any kind of attack happened, like there was no bomb as far as I can tell. It looked like the driver just drove off a bridge. So was this a dedicated driver that just killed himself for the job? Did he jump out of the car at the last minute? It's a really jumbled up moment, and I can't clearly figure it out with what we're shown on the screen, but OA is very certain that the Void have attacked that bus full of children, and I don't see the evidence to support that. And the scene right before this, where OA's father made her get into the freezing river, she talks about how that night it was so cold that one of their horses froze to death. And typically the water is colder than the atmosphere on the surface of the earth, which means when OA jumped in that ice lake, she should have come out with all kinds of hypothermia issues and severe skin damage. Obviously, OA is not immune to hypothermia because the nurse says she has it at the beginning of the show, so it makes no sense. And after the bus crashes and OA comes to on the shore next to the lake, her father's standing right there over top of her, which means either her father jumped into the water and saved her, or OA washed up to shore. Now there's a couple issues with this, because OA makes sure to mention that the bus picked her up first. So that bus went all over their little subdivision, went over the bridge, crashed into the water, and her father had time to find out about this and run to the lake to jump in and save her before she drowned. Now, at best, you get about a 1 to 3 minute window before you actually drown and die. So I find it really hard to buy that her father heard about this attack, rushed down to the lake, and got OA out in time to save her. And yeah, if OA washed up to shore instead, that would make her story more believable. But then that leaves the problem of, where are all the other kids' parents? You're telling me that the only person who can make it to the lake is OA's father? Nobody else's parents can get down there? No news vans? No anybody? I mean, these are really rich people. I'm sure they have staff and nannies and everything else that should be right up these kids' butts finding out if something like this happened. So the fact that he's the only one there and happens to be the father of the only survivor, it seems more story than reality. And now to go back and finish up with the section where OA is in the other dimension and she's with the old kind of gypsy lady. Fun fact, if you turn on the subtitles, it says that the woman on the other side is speaking in Arabic, but little baby Nina is still speaking in Russian. And it's another thing, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to chalk that up, but I want to write it down in case I find a place to put it later. And the gypsy woman in the other dimension also tells Nina that she's going to take her eyes because what lies ahead will be too horrible. And if that was something we had experienced in real time, I would put it in the angel column. But since this is something that the OA tells us after something horrible has already happened to her, it's kind of hard to put a lot of faith into that statement. And that is actually all the notes I have on episode 1. And as you can see, that's a lot of notes and a lot of different reasons with not a lot in the angel column. But the show is just getting started, and I'm gonna do one of these for every episode and keep adding to it. If not, I'm sorry, please don't unsubscribe. We're gonna have other stuff going on too besides the OA. This has just been so popular that I want to explore it as fully as I can. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed enough to like, subscribe, and share this video. I've also got a lot of other videos on my channel that you are fully encouraged to go check out. Plus, you can find me on Facebook at Say Halo Goodbye, which is my gamer tag, or Twitter at _Fanily.